And maybe I start with a short introduction, and I don't know in how many sessions you were at RDA already. Yeah, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the VRE session on visions for VRE, Science Gateways, and Virtual Labs. So in Juno, you have all the possibilities to put something in Q&A. You can unmute yourself. You could, can turn on your video. So as there are many videos are turned on and maybe the microphones, of course, the screen will be more splitted and it looks very interactive, but maybe we cannot see the slides. And so it may be good if you first keep yourself a little bit, the video turned off. But of course, we are happy. Any Q&A, put questions in the chat. Any questions in between are very welcome between the talks. So I will introduce the session in a moment. If there are any other questions, so the notes, there's a Google Doc. If Keith, sorry, if you go to the program, I could put yes, there's a Google Doc. Thank you, Meta. There we can put notes. It would be nice if every one of you put your name in there, because we would like to build working groups from this interest group, and also who was here and attending. That would be great. Let me share my screen now. And just tell me, because I don't see now anymore Juno at all. So I hope everyone sees the shared screen. Andrew, can you say yes or no? Is it good? Okay, I don't hear it.
Sandra, you're okay.
I'm okay.
Fine.
Great.
See you, and we can see your slides.
Very good. Great. So welcome to the VRE IG. And today we are talking about visions for addressing barriers, needs, and requirements for the next generation of VREs. And just to revisit what are VREs, Science Gateways, and Virtual Labs, because some of you might be new to this interest group. So if we look at research, there's really this increased complexity of research questions and hardware, software, instruments. And we know all with the data volume and data formats, it's really getting more and more each year. And there's this need for end-to-end solutions where researchers who are not really IT specialists can access data and software computing services and also equipment, and really work on their research and not deal with all the nitty-gritty details of the engineering IT part. And so they're in the middle, the researchers in the middle of all this complexity, but they can ask nowadays and answer research questions they might have not been able to ask even 10 years ago. But it's a little bit overwhelming. So the Einstein here looks a little bit overwhelmed and sad. And VRE, Science Gateways, and Virtual Labs are there to make really the researcher happy. That is the goal, and to enable them to do their research really efficiently, effectively, and reproducible. And if we look at this little graphics, so you see, of course, if you look at something from different perspectives, it can be different things, and that is the same for Science Gateways and Virtual Labs and virtual research environments. You might have heard about solutions or about the concept already, but it might have been called a research portal or a cyber infrastructure or a collaboratory. So we are not clinging to the name, but we are using it as synonym for the different for the one concept. So we have the interest group exists since the 7th plenary. So we had these different topics here. So we looked at interoperability, also at coordinating sustainable online research environments, multiple infrastructures. We looked at sustainability and also transferring data into information and knowledge, novel concepts, sustainability and reproducibility. in the last meetings, we looked really also at a common reference model and a common reference architecture. And with the last plenary, we started to look at vision for future research environments with the BOF organized by Andreas and Andrew. And we looked with the plenary GAY and the IG at good practices for communicating and collaborating effectively and efficiently within distributed communities and initiatives. And this is now a follow-up on the topic to really look at what are our visions for, on the one hand side, for the interest group, and what can we do maybe in working groups between the plenaries to bring our vision or to discuss visions. And we plan to have really the interest group as ongoing community effort at the plenaries, and it's an open-ended effort, and the working groups is more about specific topics. And so there's, for example, interviews going on a 10 years vision already. Maybe we could have a working group additionally. So this is organized by Andreas Rauber. And we would see, for example, coming out of the session today, the working groups that we can write a dear colleague, a white paper, a dear colleague letter or white paper, addressing funding bodies for requirements to make a vision for 10 years happen. So, and of course, we are open to many other working groups if you like the topic, if you want to discuss more. And if we look at visions for virtual research environment, I mean, one thing is quite clear. If we would like to have a technology we can use in 10 years, we need to start to develop it in the next 2-3 years so that it's really mature when we need it. And we have a couple of different trends and visions. One is like novel architectures, like this is a quantum computing storage on the right-hand side of the bottom, or we have virtual reality that is coming up more and more and can be used also in science gateways and virtual research environments. Or if you look on the left-hand side, there are accessibility measures more and more coming up to make it really science gateways and virtual labs more accessible for people. And there's social research. Social science is really also getting into science gateways and helping science gateways on the one hand side with their results, but also science gateways are used for social research. And at this point, I stop sharing. No, I continue sharing. Sorry. I continue sharing. So we will have several questions, but before we go into questions and into the ideas, I would like to introduce our panel. So Maytal Dahan will start with her talk, then Andrew Trielua, and then we will have a video from Mark Podkowitz. He couldn't be here today, but he sent a video. And I will switch now to the slides by Maytal and give her the word. Maytal.
Hi, everyone. Hold on, I don't quite see my slides. No, wait.
You cannot see them?
I don't see your slides still.
Okay, maybe it doesn't recognize when I switched between presentations that I, switched. Let me try this.
Yeah, so Maytal, you won't see your slides in the Juno interface. It's a feature.
Sandra is sharing them. So there we go. I see them now. But thank you, Andrew. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name, I'm the Director of Advanced Computing Texas Advanced Center in Austin, co-PI Science Gateway Community Institute project, 5-year NSF-funded project to support Science Gateway virtual research environments here in the U.S. So next slide. So a little bit about background. I've been working in the field of VREs for my career. Advanced Computing Interfaces is made up groups, web applications, and cloud and interactive computing that build software that really enable scientists and researchers to accomplish their goal. Our group handles everything from the command line up, so from APIs to front-end interfaces, with really the research easier and to really abstract technical difficulty. Through my projects at TAC and involvement as a co-PI, SGCI, I'm really passionate about impacting and creating new offerings that really move the needle of how VREs are built and used. Next slide. So it's been really exciting. The future of cyber infrastructure has really shifted beyond traditional interfaces like command line and into really this new era of web interfaces that support data analysis, collaboration, reproducibility, and kind of easy access. Science Gateways has really continued to cyber infrastructure projects such as Exceed, kind of a growth of users of Science Gateways exceed just about 8 years. And as computing continues to move, this effort is really increased attention to Science Gateways, to reach out to communities, and kind of the impact of gateways. There are companies that really only access cyber infrastructure through Science Gateways and really aren't really even aware of the background computation that's being used. Next slide. So really the motivation for VREs is for us really to broaden access to cyber infrastructure and lower the barrier of entry into computing. It's not really meant to take away things like command line, but be an enhancement to it. Next slide. So one example project of what we work on at TAC is the TAPIS project. It's an API that offers a unified, simplified, automated approach to have secure interactions with various advanced computing infrastructure, whether it's storage, compute, cloud resources. The goal is to really kind of create this single interface to be able to access all these resources. Researchers have the ability to use TAPIS to automate their research computing workflows and expose their tools. VRE developers can leverage the API for easy development, and HPC centers and infrastructure providers can really expose their resources through this API to a broad audience. And really, this is just one example of tools like this that really advance the landscape of VREs and create a more automated, secure, and scalable software solutions. Next slide. So one of the questions that was posed to this panel is, what will society need to trust in and engage with researchers? As we've witnessed this past year, really teaching society about the impact and importance of science is a valuable goal. It's been really fascinating that we've had to kind of defend science this past year. One gateway that I've gotten to work on as SGCI and my team at TAC is the University of Texas COVID-19 Modeling Consortium. So when March 2020 rolled around and COVID came to the scene, it was really all hands on deck to develop a VRE and deploy it in production that modeled the trajectory of COVID-19. And the goal of this VRE was really twofold. One was to help researchers accomplish their science by helping them integrate these really large-scale data products into their SCIR models and easily compute and reproduce the trajectory of COVID-19. And the second, that was equally important, was to do visualization and risk communication that is used by local and state policymakers. Essentially, how do we effectively communicate science and research to the wider community in a way that they can understand? These forecasts were used by the CDC, White House, and local policymakers, and we've had over 1 million visits from 180 countries, and it's been featured on CNN and the New York Times. And really the effectiveness of this VRE is, how do we use gateways to contribute to society at large? And how do we use it to communicate science effectively to a wider non-scientific audience? And also, in addition to impacting the research and scientific goals. Next slide. So another question is, what will I as a researcher need to do to have high quality research efficiently 10 to 15 years from now? So, I really think this problem, I think about this problem pretty often when it comes to sort of the mission and vision of my team. And fortunately and unfortunately, many of the same problems that existed 15 years ago still exist today to some extent. So how do we provide ease of use in data management and research execution? How do we create execution environments that continue to really remove those technology hurdles? And how do we best handle things like reproducibility and sustainability to not continually recreate the wheel? And I think continuing to create innovative software solutions with a constant eye to using technology to solve problems and remove hurdles is really the key. So I think that's it for my slide. So I look forward to kind of questions and discussions from this panel.
Thank you very much. So if there's not at the moment questions, we will go in the discussion also later after the speaker. So I would give it now to Andrew. And Andrew, you can share your slides.
Thank you, thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Maytal, for that talk. One. So what I'd like to do is give you a quick overview of the program that I'm responsible for, which is the platforms program run through the Australian Research Data Commons. I'm the director of the part of the ARDC that looks after this program. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet. For me, this is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So everyone has their own definition for this. As Sandra points out, people call the different bits of the elephant many different things. My organization used to run a program of virtual laboratories. We now prefer to talk about e-research platforms. And so we're defining these in a way that's very consistent with the definition or the view that Maytal gave you, a set of online services, often with some integration or orchestration functions, often with connections to particular data resources that enable researchers to collect or generate data, analyze those data, and produce outputs. And implicit in that definition is the infrastructure that underpins that. The data needs to live somewhere. The analysis and orchestration functions need to run on something. So the platforms that we're talking about here assume underpinning infrastructure that will let the researchers get their jobs done. And of course, as Maytal's quite correctly pointed out, what we want to do is we want to let the researchers focus on the research task and not get hung up on the underlying infrastructure. This program over the last couple of years has invested in 26 platforms. We are investors in those platforms to the tune of 22 million Australian dollars. This is, I guess, kind of 15 million US. But importantly, we are not the majority investor. We're often the single largest investor, but we have a greater than our amount of investment as co-investment for a range of partners. And Maytal talked about the need for sustainability. Part of the reason we're focusing on co-investment is because that means that there are other people that will care about this platform when our investment finishes, and therefore they're more likely to be sustained. There's lots more details at the URL that's on those slides. As in running this platform, we're trying to do two things, and I should say here that this is a national initiative, so we're trying to have national impact. So part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to have research impact. So we want more Australian researchers and indeed their collaborators having access to platforms that let them transform what they're doing. Transform what they're doing in terms of the kind of research they can do, and transform what they're doing in terms of the speed with which they can do research. So they can do different kinds of things and they can do it more quickly. But because we're a national infrastructure investment, we want to make sure that we have an impact on national research infrastructure. So we're looking for sustainable platforms, as I've said already. We're looking for a more coherent national infrastructure, and we want to encourage those platforms to make use of common services some that we provide through our organization, some that they share among themselves. And importantly, we want to develop a community of the people who are developing and operating those platforms so that they can share challenges, they can share solutions, they can exchange best practices, and they can support each other more effectively. In terms of the kinds of platforms we're investing in, we like to think of it as three broad categories. And my thanks to Kerry Levitt, who's the person who's responsible for managing this program, for this way of looking at things. So one is a relatively conventional online portal or workbench. You access it via a browser, you've got a range of tools, you've got access to data sets. The flagship that I would point to there is a thing called EcoCommons, which is eco-informatics, species distribution modeling. But sometimes people don't need something that heavyweight. They just need the ability to run a set of tools. And so we're working on a platform in a box approach, in particular working with the Nectar Research Cloud, who are part of my organization as infrastructure partners, deploying a containerization solution based around Kubernetes to make it easier for people to containerize tools and deploy them. And then the third kind is what you might think of as multi-site deployments, where we have standardized platforms that are deployed at multiple sites. And it's particularly relevant for organizations that have the same kinds of instruments but scattered around the country. And they want them to operate as a federation. And so the focus there is on single sign-on, federated search, more collaboration support. I've talked about the investment that we make. We're not just making an investment of dollars. Yes, we invest dollars, but we also invest services and expertise and storage and compute infrastructure. We're the Australian Research Data Commons, so we have a lot of data services. And we're, as I've said, building up this community of practice to help our platforms with technical challenges, but also non-technical challenges. How do you run an effective project? How do you make the argument to researchers about the value of what you're producing? So these are examples of some of the kinds of things that we can provide. And we have staff who work with the projects to help with all of these aspects. So that's the overview. If you have questions about the program as a whole, those are my contact details. If you have questions about the specifics of the platforms program, I'd encourage you to contact Kerry Levitt, whose contact details are there, and who I hope is still awake and taking part in this session. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. And of course, also thank you, Maytal. I was a little bit fast in switching to the next one. I'm sorry, but both great talks. And now we go into a video. So Mark Podkowitz couldn't be here, but he prepared a 5-minute video and his point of view. So he's in law, he's a researcher, and he has a position about what should be researched for him in law and science gateways. And let me start this video. One moment. And I hope it shares fine again. So we tried it. So let's see.
I think over the next 10 to 15 years in the legal
Everyone
profession
hears that?
and legal research, we will see the introduction of a wide range of tools that help us with analysis of judicial opinions and documents, as well as document construction, generation of synthetic legal data, and more sophisticated ways to process legal
Sandra, the sound just went off the video. Can you do what you had done initially?
It would be better when I shall share. But this was what was it initially. Let me jump back there.
But the most comprehensive
okay again?
databases are through paid for subscription.
Yeah, I can hear it.
For law firms or academic institutions, but not available broadly to everyone. Relevant court documents, or the latest court documents, are accessible through PACER, which is an acronym for Public Access to Court Electronic Records. And there's a cost per page associated with accessing contemporary legal filings, which can be a barrier to some researchers or the public in general. Broadly speaking, most legal research is desk-based, although we do see a lot of people collaborating with other researchers in the fields of anthropology, sociology, criminology, and collecting primary data. A lot of the work that we do is finding things favorable or finding things that support our opinions while distinguishing things that are unfavorable toward our opinions from the opinions that we hold. So in other words, we're trained to argue cogently, precisely, and persuasively. As a consequence, there isn't the same methodological rigor applied to the types of researchers that we do, as opposed to the types of researching that is done in other fields like the hard sciences. As a result, and reputationally, lawyers aren't necessarily publicly considered the most trustworthy. I mean, I'm reminded of the old joke, what's 1,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean? A good start. As a consequence, there are tremendous hurdles that we as lawyers have in gaining the public trust and getting people to engage with the work that we do. Consequently, I think it's imperative for us to be more transparent in the manner in which we conduct our research and work toward getting a greater public understanding of the type of work that we do in order to increase public engagement and public trust. I think that the application of technology to lower barriers in the access to justice spaces will do a lot to help people better understand the work that we do and the type of research that we do. And I think that in the laboratories of the future, we will see much greater interdisciplinary engagement between law and other professions, such as we're seeing with the use of corpus linguistics, for instance, in the interpretation of statutes and contracts and constitutional provisions in the United States. I think broadly speaking, the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence tools to legal analysis will help us. I think that being able to break down and deconstruct law and legal language and statutes will allow us to have greater automation in the field of law. I think that we're going to see a lot of groundbreaking research, not only in areas like legal design thinking, but in ways that we can lower the barriers of access to justice by the creation and distribution of easier to use tools that help people engage more with law and legal process, but also allow us to collect more data on the types of issues that are affecting populations on a grand scale. When it comes to primary data collection, we're already seeing places like the Stanford Legal Design Lab that are doing some very incredible work on figuring out how people engage with law and the legal system. So I do think that law, or at least I hope that law will begin to adopt the same types of rigorous approaches that some of the hard sciences do and some of the social sciences do with respect to the collection and analysis of data. I think that gone are the days when a lawyer can just come up with a convincing argument by looking at a few statutes and a few cases. I think that we are going to move toward more evidence-based research or evidence-based policies, which will require the use of evidence-based research to allow us to put together better laws, better regulations, and better serve society as a whole. In order to accomplish this, we will need greater public engagement. We will need more public input into the system. We will need to apply evidence-based approaches to the way in which we implement law and policy. And in order to do that, the public needs to be a greater part of the process. So not only do we need to incorporate more primary data collection in the field of legal research, but we need to have more long-term studies looking at how our particular decisions are helping affect policy, what the impact of that is, rather than just looking at historical data and making rhetorical arguments and or pointing out why something that was done 50 years ago was bad, or why this opinion written in 1890 is bad. We need to look more toward the future in the legal profession and in legal research rather than dwelling in the past.
So that was Mark's talk. So obviously, unfortunately, he cannot be here, but I think he has a really also interesting perspective. What is the vision in his field with law? What is the direction we are going there? So I can give my best to answer questions. He gave me a little bit more insight, but I'm not so sure how far I can go. I'm happy to give his contact details if you have more questions in the research area of law. So for the moment, I would open it up for questions from the audience. Speak up or put a question in Q&A or in the chat. And while you are thinking about your questions, I will start with the questions we prepared. So maybe all the panelists, Maytal, Andrew, you can bring your picture back. Yes, that is good. Thank you. So we had a couple of questions prepared. So if you look at the technical requirements, like we are there, we have dashboards, notebooks, containers, of course, with aspects like security and connectivity. So on the technical requirement side, what would you see what VREs, science gateways have to fulfill also in 10 years again?
Maytal, I'd love to have you answer that.
Sounds good. I have lots of thoughts about this. I think that VREs need to really become production quality services, just like research computers. So I know for me and my team, our focus has really been on how to production quality services. And that starts all the way from the creation of the software and how you plan for the software and the architecture, all the way to execution and deployment and maintenance. So, things like containerization, things like Kubernetes, all those new, all the kind of latest and greatest technology really help us do that. But also having that mindset that, even if you're going to start your VRE in a lab with a grad student, how do you start it and make sure your code is in a Git repository? How do you make sure it's documented? How do you make sure that there's smoke tests or unit testing? So really, at least for me, one of my big passions is really looking at it from, good software practices and really creating science gateways that are production quality. We have science gateways, for example, like Design Safe, that are really expected 24/7. Researchers are using it in the middle of the night if there's an earthquake to, take pictures and upload their data. So it really has to be available just like any other production service.
Great, thank you. Andrew.
I'm not going to try and take notes while I speak. So I think the production quality, so building on what Maytal said, I think that in 10 or 15 years' time, what we need is our analysis and our collaboration environments and the work we do with our VREs to become part of the research record. And what I mean by that is that at the moment, if I read a publication, I can go back to the things that they cited 10, 15 years ago. I can read the publications they cited. I can go, yeah, I can see how that supports their current line of argument. But if I read a publication and I'm lucky enough to have a link to the data set they used and the software they used, my ability to go back and get the software and run the software and get the results they got, I might be lucky, I might not. Maytal's looking similarly disbelieving. And so what we have at the moment is we have this gap in the scholarly record. We have results appearing in the publications where we kind of have to take it on trust. And what I want in 10 or 15 years' time is the ability for someone to say, oh, okay, here's the results they got. Let me get their data set. Let me run it through my software and see if I get the same answers. Or let me take their software and run my data set through it and see if I believe the results that come out. So it's having that be part of the routine machinery of research, if you like, is where I'd like to get to. 10 or 15 years is probably not long enough, but that's the vision.
Yes. I wanted to say we can wish for it, and we can
Sure.
prepare it. Yes.
Yeah, I'll get my magic wand.
You're positive. So we have 3 hands here, so I would start. So Keith, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sandra, I'm also building on what Maytal and Andrew have said, and especially what Andrew said just now. My question is this: how do we resolve the paradox or incompatibility between having fully recorded provenance, including dealing with versions of assets that are being used, and the protection of personal data about who did what, when, and how?
So, Andrew, you sounded like you wanted to answer.
So Keith, that's a good question. I guess it depends on whether the personally identifying information is of a sensitive nature. So if the provenance information is Andrew Trelaw opened this data file, selected this Kubernetes container, chose these input parameters, ran the software and got these results, that seems fine. If it's Andrew Trelaw accessed this data file containing sensitive information about the location of an archaeological dig site, then that's more problematic. But that's not just a VRE problem, that's a generic research problem.
Meta, additional thoughts?
I have no good thoughts here. I thankfully we don't deal a lot, obviously kind of protected data and personal data is something that continues to expand its scope here. And I think will continue to make an impact on VREs. I have not thought of it from the aspect that you're coming from. And I think that's a really, really interesting perspective. And it sort of also ties into kind of the sustainability and reproducibility of kind of those software pieces, in addition to kind of the personal data. How do you create an environment where those software pieces can actually be replicated? If it's software that's 5 years old or 10 years old, it probably doesn't even run anymore. So I cringe at the pieces of software I wrote 15 years ago that are still holding on. But most, unfortunately, a lot of times, something that's a couple of years old won't even really execute anymore. So I think that's interesting. I don't have a lot of thoughts about it, but it definitely gives a different angle to protected and privacy information.
Yeah, I'm hoping that containerization is going to solve at least some of that problem for us, Maytal. It's containerization is at least better than here's an entire image of an entire system that you need to instantiate in order to run stuff. So having said that, there is a group tomorrow maybe talking about software source code as another approach to dealing with reproducibility, which I'm looking forward to attending. But I think the answer can't be, oh, here's a lump of C++ code that you need to run. That's not going to work for most researchers.
No, and I wanted to say also with containers, we see already, if you just want to use a Linux container in Windows, you are already running so many hurdles and if you have different versions of, operating systems. But containers are a start. Maybe it's a solution for the next 10 years, but if you talk with digital librarians, they're like, 10 years, okay, but 20 years, no, it's not the solution for 20 years. And we are talking about 20, 30 years. We are librarians. Yeah. So Karen, you also want to ask a question.
Hi, good to see you guys. So for those of you who don't know me, I represent the World Data System, which is this consortium of 130 or so data distribution centers globally. And so we have a new project in my office to try to support data managers who want to increase the integration and reach of their data products by documenting workflows. And I'm targeting VREs as a potential endpoint for that. And so my very limited understanding is that, you have VREs that have a bring your own data sort of access point to them. You have VREs which manage their own data assets, and you're allowed to work with those data assets. But what would your advice be to data managers who want to create a flow of their data into the types of resources that you provide that may not be, if they're not already a data center that is already integrated within a VRE? Is that a bad question? I feel like
You start this first for this time.
Sorry, I was actually answering Amy Nürnberger in chat. Can you just try that again, Karen?
Yeah, sure. So if you were to speak to data managers, and these can be small, long-tail data, but they can also be large network data repositories that wanted to become more integrated with VREs and wanted to sort of increase this or identify a pathway, what would your advice be to data managers? What do they need to be looking at, either in terms of mechanisms for reaching out to VREs or technical? I'm more interested in the technical workflows that they need to support in order for their data assets to become integrated within VREs, accessible, discoverable, within VREs.
Okay, so my apologies for not hearing the question the first time, and thank you for repeating it. As my colleague Kerry Levitt has noted in chat, that is a great question. Okay, so I'm going to give a couple of answers that will sound glib and may in fact actually even be glib, who knows. The first is I would look at what the communities who are the primary users of those data services are doing. The WDS, in my high-level understanding, has more of a discipline focus for its data centers. And so I'd be looking at, are there particular VREs that are starting to be used by those disciplines where I could look to make the connections more obvious? And then the second answer I would give is I would fall back on the word that we haven't yet heard in this talk. Well, Amy put it in the chat, which is I would make sure that my data is fair. So if the data centers are making sure their data is findable and accessible, which is not necessarily open, but accessible, and then ideally interoperable and reusable, at least for the communities that you're serving, then it's going to be much easier for the VREs to hook into those data resources rather than having to produce whole new ways of getting access to stuff. Now, it depends on the community, right? So to pick an example from the previous session that you and I were in, Karen, if you're working with astronomers, you would hope that the data centers are supporting some of the IVOA standards, the International Virtual Observatory Alliance standards, because then it's going to be much easier for the VREs to say, here's a set of standard APIs that this community knows how to work with already. We're just going to write to those. If you've got communities that don't have a well-organized set of APIs, it's more difficult. But then I think you could be having a dialogue with the main users of your data around what are the most effective ways that you can surface that data for consumption by machines as well as by people.
My answer is really similar to Andrew's. Andrew's last part is really focusing on the fair and understanding the community and what the community needs for the data are. So, whether it's integrating the data into a tool that offers an API interface on top of it, whether it's creating your own VRE that offers kind of a set of data collections that the community can access, but kind of understanding what the community needs are and how to make the data kind of fair, I think is really the key, and then a lot of it is sometimes just legwork, as awareness and creating awareness in the community that this data exists, and creating, models where you show the usefulness of the data. I think there are so many interesting data sets that are out there that, get used by a pretty tiny subset of researchers, and how can you create awareness around that data?
Yeah, I think one further topic is besides fair, or at least one of my missions, a little bit working a lot with librarians, is to bring researchers also to repositories, to preservation systems, that they use Zenodo, that they use GitHub, because they're already made for having data collections in a way that it's preserved. So there are already a lot of domain-specific repositories. So I think the connection between VREs and repositories is a really important connection. Like Rob Quick also mentioned that it's, exactly because maybe the Science Gateway goes away, but normally the preservation system would stick around. So Rob, do you want to add maybe something, because it fits in this topic?
Yeah, and then Kieran has his hand up.
Yes.
Hey, Rob.
Hello.
Hi, Rob.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Here I am. So I think you covered it pretty well, Sandra, and I think that what Andrew was saying and some of the work I've done that was sponsored by RDA US actually was adding some of the stuff that's done in Data Fabric, which gives PIDs to some of the processes that happen within a gateway. And we did this with the Science and Engineering Application Grid called CGrid. And it really looks at not only adding PIDs to the data and the intermediate data products, but also to the software that's being run, to the environment that it's being run in. So you can have that, at least the ability to find out about the environment and the software versions that were used in a process, so it can be replicated at some time outside of the gateway. The gateways somewhat are a little more transient than the research. In fact, you would hope that that's the case.
Great, thanks, Rob. Kira? We are not hearing you. You have probably to unmute yourself.
All right, that might be better.
Yeah.
It's pretty slow. All right. Now I was cycling back to the original question of what would it need to look like in 10, 15 years, sort of building on what Andrew Mittal said. To me, it's that all the things that are currently that we consider as VREs should be productionized, should be just run-of-the-mill stuff, and we should start to see new things emerge that are quite a step change from where we are today. And then in your one, you talked about some of the emerging things like the virtual reality, augmented reality, and those kind of ways of interacting. Maybe that's part of the story. But I think we need to see a lot more of those innovations. I think in the last probably 5 years, my observation is that the market's matured. So we had probably 10, 15 years, a lot of effort going into the very innovative ideas about virtual labs, virtual research environments. Lots of new experiments happened, and now we're starting to mature, then they're converging. I'm not seeing that pipeline of new innovative thinking happening yet. And I think that's a risk, because we're going to get to 10, 15 years, we might end up having very mature ones, but there's no new innovation coming through. So that's what I think needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience, I'm sort of seeing the beginning of that. We're working on projects where essentially kind of the actual wet lab experience gets automated through software. So that's been really interesting. Or, Sandra's mention of VR, we've been working with a group of researchers that they handle kind of infant and mother mortality during childbirth. And one of the things that they realized is that there's a lot of like apprehension with regards to the birthing experience. So they use a lot of virtual reality with their patients to give them more of that real experience without having to step into a hospital, or, using VR kind of to do molecule and protein binding and looking at it that way. So I think there are certain pockets where people are pushing the envelope of using technology to really kind of integrate their research in innovative ways. But I agree with you, Kieran. I think that there are certain things that I hope in the next 3 to 5 years are just a given. You push a button and you can have your science gateway in a production quality environment, spun up very easily. And then really get to focus on the specific research for your community, and then get to go to the next level and work on some of these more innovative approaches.
So, Amy, I'm not totally sure whether all your comments were already solved yet via the discussions in the chat. Would you like to ask a question or comment?
Thank you for that. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. So my question was really, I was half listening into the conversation that's going on around VRE for machine learning and all of the training data associated with that. And I think there's in my head, at least, there's a clear intersection between virtual research environments and where we're looking at machine learning growing and reproducibility of and things like that. So I was just wondering if this is an area that has been taken under the umbrella at all by the VRE group, or if they're like, no, subset of machine learning, have fun with that kind of thing.
So yes, as the VRE group, I think we are taking it on. It's very cute that at the moment we are finishing a paper about science gateways and AI. Today it will be finished. So yeah, I think I will give after that the question to the panelists. Sorry, but I'm very enthusiastic about this topic because I think on the one hand side, it's really using AI methods to create good virtual research environments is something I would really like to see in the near future, but also using science gateways to make AI more usable for researchers who are not into AI methods. And that is exactly what virtual research environments are for, to make something accessible, methods accessible, which are otherwise very complicated to learn from scratch. And now I give it to the panelists.
Start first. Yeah, I think that, as Sandra said, we are definitely engaging these communities. I think that for me, machine learning and AI is obviously still growing and really finding its role. And I think that there's both Sandra's aspect is making those tools available to the wider research community. For me, it's also, can virtual research environments bring awareness to both what machine learning offers and also kind of what the pitfalls or downfalls of machine learning is, and how to maybe, create some awareness around that as well. Kind of can VREs bring awareness to the biases that you might be creating in your machine learning, and really kind of open it up instead of it being very, very niche-y, open it up to kind of be a broader, to meet a broader community.
And I would add that, yes, all of that. One of the platforms projects that we invested in last year is Environments to Accelerate Machine Learning-Based Discovery. It's essentially a platform to make it easier for researchers who currently don't use machine learning techniques to make it easier to take those up. So it's sort of a bootstrapping process for researchers to get into ML techniques, giving them a range of tools, giving them software environments, giving them the ability to run those tools on, massive GPU clusters. So trying to kind of address Kieran's concerns, trying to kickstart some of the innovative stuff that we hope will be more routine in 5 or 10 years' time. Kieran's question, I think we've answered. Mark Dietrich and Rob have both got their hands up, Sandra.
Yeah. So Mark?
Oh, and thanks to Kerry for the link to that project details.
Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon. Pick your time zone. I apologize if I'm sort of coming at this sideways, but I've been involved in a lot of conversations in the European industrial space that are talking about things around data ecosystems, digital ecosystems. And I think the concept of VRE, gateways, labs, platforms, et cetera, is quite useful because it's a technological underpinning to a community. And I'm wondering if your work has given thought to the community aspects of who's in, who's out, what are our rules of engagement, what are our rules of participation, et cetera. I'm also kind of reflecting on some concepts from an earlier SGI paper. Nancy Wilkins-Deere was one of the authors. I'm sure several of you were also authors, so my apologies. But it talked about dissemination and communication as being sort of, essential characteristics of these gateways. This is isn't what you're doing. It is what you're doing. So I'm wondering if there's some thought about formalizing any of this around the pile of ever-changing technologies that might be thrown into a virtual research environment. I'm wondering if it's more important to talk about the anthropological dynamics than it is to talk about the specific lists of technologies to be included or not, or how to keep them sustainable, maintainable, et cetera.
Andrew, Meta? Maybe, I see Andrew is typing maybe Meta, like if you first the chance.
Sure. So if I understood your question correctly, there was a lot to unpack there. Thank you. I think one part of it was about sort of being the gatekeepers of what communities are involved with science gateways. And then the other part is really that dissemination and community, engagement. And I think, as far as sort of what communities engage in a science gateway, I think, we're certainly not the gatekeepers of that. And I think that the best practices and the concepts behind science gateways are beneficial to kind of a wide variety of disciplines and communities. For example, I have a science gateway that works with a construction company, and they use it to do science around concrete and the density of concrete, because apparently concrete is very expensive and you have to do that properly. And never would I thought I would deal with concrete density. And so I think that, it's, there's sort of no gateway, you're in, you're out concept. But I think that the second piece with regards to kind of disseminating results and sharing your research and it is extremely important in science gateways, and is kind of a cornerstone of SGC, of science gateways, because really it's whether it's, the librarians interested in archiving and historical data and making sure that that's available to the community, or scientific artifacts that are important to continue to research and disseminate. I think that needs to be something that's thought and planned out with every science gateway that comes to fruition. Beyond just how do we solve these science problems for ourselves, what do we do with these pieces in order to disseminate them to the community at large, and how do we, kind of keep some data provenance around them.
Great, thanks, Meta. Andrew, something?
Yeah, so I would add to that. Sorry, before I answer this question, should I mute when I'm typing, or is the noise not too bad?
For me, it's okay.
All right, fine. I'll leave it as is then. So I guess I would, as a representative of a national organization funded with taxpayers' dollars, part of what I see as my responsibility is stewarding the taxpayers' dollars as best as I can, and investing in a VRE that doesn't get used by a lot of people doesn't seem like a great use of money to me. So one of the things that we emphasize in the proposals that we get and in the project plans once we make an investment decision is, what's your strategy for reaching out to users? What's your strategy for engaging people outside your core user base? How are you going to train people to use the gateway, the VRE, as effectively as possible? So for us, it's certainly not just about, sorry, it's late at night, well, early in the morning. It's certainly not just about, build the cool new technology and hope they'll come. I've led build it and hope they'll come projects. They didn't work. I've got no desire to do that again. And I don't want to invest in other projects that'll make the same mistakes that I used to make. So we have certainly in Australia, we have a strong emphasis on user engagement and spreading the value of the gateway.
Yeah, user engagement is a big topic in science gateways and virtual labs, virtual research environment, which makes sense. And I hope also that there will be more interactions with this industry, because I think the concept is a good one also for industry. Kerry's also added a comment in chat about, we don't usually invest in niche VREs. We're trying to get the biggest bang for our buck. So yeah. I'd copy that out of chat, Kerry, but you can't copy stuff out of chat in Juno, so I'll do a screenshot. Yeah. Okay, so I love the discussion. I don't really want to interrupt it too much, but we want also to make a plan for the next working groups. So thanks a lot, first of all, to Andrew and Maytal for a great panel, for great talks, and for your concept ideas. And I would give it to Andreas now for the next part of the session. And so, Andreas, we see only half of your face. You might want, yeah.
Still growing up, It's early spring, water me a bit, and then I'll grow into the screen.
So
good.
Your stage.
My stage. So I'm supposed to have a structured discussion on how to move forward with a few concrete steps, because what we have seen today is a number of really exciting examples of advanced VREs being developed, deployed, used. But my feeling is that whenever we see these, they're isolated examples, when we all know that we need a much broader, much more connected world. We also see that many of those are highly disciplinary in their setup. When we see that all the research is getting increasingly interdisciplinary, there was some discussion before in chat on long tail data, big data, and all those connectivities, and reuse of data across different disciplines and questions. And also something we have observed in earlier evaluations is that a lot of those advanced projects that feed into those pipelines are focused on specific thematic aspects. So whatever, either HPC or collaborative interfaces or machine learning or virtual reality. And we somehow need to bring this together. I share Karen's comment before that there were quite a few driving visions a few years back that now feed into the pipeline, but we do not see as much of that vision emerging to feed the pipeline in the next few years to come. And what we also found was that we think that people think on different timelines. So while researchers are usually perceived as thinking on the much more advanced technology and cutting edge things, whereas the research infrastructures are being perceived as slower, more focused on stability, functional production quality thing. Even there, we saw that this is not entirely true. I mean, the research infrastructures definitely think on stability evolutionary steps rather than radical revolutions here. But we also noticed that researchers in quite a few discussions are not really looking that far into the future as well. They're having visions for their own research, but not for the tools that are driving it could boost their research. And so what we actually seem to be missing is a way that moves us forward in a more structured way. So something that gets us into constant feeding of the pipeline, where we have very visionary technology and services that step by step become completely transparent and unnoticed as the electricity that we have at the moment. So what we have done so far was a number of interviews with researchers at different stages, from early postdocs to Nobel laureates. We talked to a number of researchers who turn into science fiction authors, so who understand the science but do not need to worry about the next research grant, but rather make their living on developing visions, usually bad visions for the future, to warn us of what might come if we don't take the right steps. And so the question now is basically, what would be, in your opinion, good steps forward that would lead to a concrete outcome that would allow us to feed such a pipeline? Things that we could address to funders or other bodies that you think would be ideal target groups. Things such as whatever, a set of brainstorming meetings to develop visions that are then broken down into step-by-step things that take us there, or a set of meetings that identify pain points in order to elicit needs and then scale them up to project into technologies to address them. So this would be kind of the goals or some of the ideas that we would have for setting up a concrete working group. And the question would be, which target audience? We had initially envisaged funders, but are there others that we are missing in order to drive that vision? Which steps would you think, and who would be interested in actually helping drive and take this forward? And now please give me something to structure in terms of discussion. I'm trying to monitor chat and the Q&A session here, but feel free to just unmute and start talking.
Yeah, I wanted to say we'll help you with Q&A and the chat when there is something. So I presented it already like a working group that is existing a little bit, because I would like to have that working group. So this is my pitch, to have the working group on writing the Dear Colleague letter, white paper. I'm happy to set that up, to be responsible, to have that we have meetings. But I need, of course, people who are interested in joining me in that. So is anyone on the call who found it interesting to make a white paper, talk about what are the pain points, what do we need to address at funding bodies? And you can put it in the chat. You can,
They're all the visionary people. Lots of new bubbles thumbing up.
But so I've seen, I got the thumbs up. So what I would do is setting up them. I contact people who were in the session today, and set up a first meeting in the next month, so that we can start discussing about, well, what could we write down for funding bodies. So I would do that. I take all the thumbs up like a positive sign. Now I give it to Kieran.
Now I'll look. I'm just going to say similar things. I think everyone's probably interested, but concerned about the time commitments to make it happen. So yeah, just I think we'll struggle. Can we get commitment from people here while we have people here to be interested in it?
So one thing I was proposing, as soon as we are allowed to have proper meetings again, because I hate brainstorming in front of a screen. Sorry, this is with all this virtual research environments, the screen is not the best environment for creative brainstorming. But as soon as we were again allowed to have meetings, it would be nice if in the different regions, if a few people would pull together such brainstorming workshops. We were thinking of doing, for example, something like a Dutch tool seminar in the more European context, sitting together for 4 days and specifically for 4 nights, banging our heads together and drafting scenarios and a few visions and pulling together and projecting bottom up from trends that are out there. We were also thinking whether we would do or whether such things could be done into disciplinary specific within specific research groups or environments. Anybody who would be interested in doing such a brainstorming meeting in their region or in their institutional setting or within their community?
That might be a good question for Andrew from the Australian one. Andrew, that's like an interesting idea to do, and the RDC is in a good position to pull something like that together. Any thoughts?
Yeah, he answered in the chat that's something we could consider in our region.
Yeah, so in Australia, this year is taken up, that aspect of my life is taken up with our National Research Infrastructure Roadmap process, which is going to run all year and ideally land in a large document and hopefully attach dollars that maps out the next 5 to 10 years for Australia's research infrastructure. So that's the main game for my organisation this year. Once we get through that, though, so in 2022, I think it would be really interesting to explore, okay, now we know what the national research infrastructure landscape looks like. Let's now explore some of those future possibilities. And I think that's something that Kerry and I could discuss as a possible activity in next year.
Yes, and I would also say I would be so much interested to set something up also here in Chicago, Illinois. There's so many, let's say different universities just in Chicago directly, that it would be really interesting to do something here in, let's say, the Midwest, in the US. Yeah, definitely. If we can meet again, yes.
Yes, so at least for those either in the European context or willing to travel to Europe sometime, next year, and who would be interested in joining such a Dutch tool event, let me know. We are still contemplating of putting together a proposal. Andrew, yes. 4 hands up, please. That would be really cool, and if other regions then duplicate it or mirrors similar things, and we bring that together, I think that could be a really rich resource and also an exciting resource to create. Because once for a change, we're allowed to dream up visions that do not have to be proven and put into deployment and come with person month attached and a dollar bill attached. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from a personal point of view, I didn't travel to Europe the first time in many years, for over 1.5 years. Yes, I want to come to DAX too. Honestly, anything that is further than 1 mile around my apartment is already exciting. So, that will be very exciting for me to come to DAX too. So, Rob, we can work together on something like not only a Midwest, a Northeast West hub in event in next year around this. I'm sure that people will be happy to travel to Chicago. Okay, I think that seems something very positive. NSF Big Data Hubs. Yes, Amy. I think that is a good connection to discuss. So the Big Data Hubs, for everyone who don't know them, maybe in the US we have the different Big Data Hubs in the different regions. funded by NSF. And they're discussing solutions around data, but also really share data, open data, large data and access, HPC and HDC for data. So regionally based collaboratives, exactly. Maybe Amy, I should let you talk about that. Okay. Okay. So
sorry, you go, Sandra, and then I'd like to add something.
Yes, that's what I really like. I think people also realized because of COVID that it's sometimes really great to have something regional in person, that we are missing that because we did take it for granted. It was a kind of, let's meet, talk a little bit. I'm not taking that for granted anymore. I'm happy to invest some time to do something regional. Yeah. Andrew.
I was just thinking about the idea of the collaboratives. Another thing you could build on, Andy, would be the German NFDI, the National Research Data Infrastructure. The reason I'm picking on that is that the way that Germany is building its national infrastructure is as a series of discipline-focused consortia. Now, the discipline-focused consortia who are looking at the data issues, but that would be a very good place to start if you wanted to work with particular discipline groups to say, okay, you're getting your data stuff sorted out. Now let's talk about what you're going to do with the data on top of that. And that would be another thing you could hook into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely have them on the radar as one of the models.
Mm-hmm. Keith is holding his hand up. Keith?
Another possible area you could use are the clusters around the EOSC in environment, in social science, and so on, as a local in the European sense grouping.
Yeah, no, it would be interesting to see if any of those clusters would, for example, be willing or interested in running such a brainstorming exercise within their own, realms, basically, as they're basically driving the vision for their own discipline. Keith, are you in contact with any of these?
I mean, certainly within the VRE cluster, there's been some limited brainstorming, but it was much better when it was done over wine.
Yeah, that's why we are hoping for a Dutch tour one. Anybody else who's interested in joining such an initiative?
Or maybe has suggestions for us whom to contact as a target group also to ask for visions. So only for me, for example, I really loved, I've never heard before I talked with Mark Podkowitz, how lawyers see themselves in the data science world. I really enjoyed his talk, to be honest. He's like, yeah, we do what we would like to do, and we have to become more accountable for things we are doing. So it's good to hear that from a lawyer. So maybe, yeah. So maybe it's nice. Maybe there are target groups where you say, oh, you should ask, this researcher group, or or like Andrea said, that they ask, authors, writers of science fiction. So what would you think? What other groups would be interesting to ask for a vision? And I understand that we should have VREs in our target groups.
I realized we targeted the wrong audience for the visions.
Okay, so we will involve wineries and beer brewers. I get that.
We already have science fiction authors. We're definitely rounding up the spectrum. Yeah, it's broadening the scope of what is defining research.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Christopher, we are missing also the face-to-face. Yes, absolutely. So that would be a goal from next year, to have face-to-face meetings again and be at the plenaries, and face-to-face.
Face next to face, yeah, side by side. Does anybody have a clue where the next plenary will be held physically? Andrew, you?
I think I'm hearing South Korea.
Seoul, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not sure whether it's planned. I thought it's still planned virtually this year, or am I wrong?
I think they're monitoring the situation. So it's part of International Data Week, Andy.
Yeah,
so there's a plenary and a SciDataCon together. I think at the moment they're still hoping to do it physically, but yes, it's very dependent on their ability to control COVID.
Yeah, they're planning, it's a hybrid. They're planning hybrid right now. So that's what I'm hearing.
Okay, thanks, Yolanda. Yeah.
Cool.
November, is that when it is?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, November, the week of November 8th to 12th.
Right.
Oh, near to supercomputing, huh?
Everything's near to something, Sandra.
I know, but I have to make always a decision for supercomputing when it's near to RDA. So Rob,
I would choose RDA every time over supercomputing. I'm not a fan of supercomputing in any form or fashion. So
wow.
I agree to that, Rob. My problem is only that I'm one of the track shares. I can.
Yeah, I always hope that no one will ask me to go until it's too late to book, because then I have a good reason to say no.
Sandra, I'm thinking we have 6 minutes. We should probably talk about next steps, if any.
Yes.
And then Rob had his hand up a long time ago, and I don't think we ever got to his question.
Maybe say, yeah, Rob.
Let me come back here. Actually, it was very much a panel question, and I was going to talk a little bit about the trend I see in portals being more, are the need for portals being more in data delivery than traditionally, where it was access to HPC resources and interacting with the computational infrastructure. In fact, their recent gateway or VRE I designed, really we had to start the process off with making a data management plan. So I was wondering two things. One, if the other panelists were seeing a similar trend, that data delivery being more at the forefront of what is necessary for the portal, and two, if so, how they approach these portals that are more data delivery mechanisms than HPC access and delivering to a single science.
So my policy position on these kinds of questions is it's all about the data. So I can't argue with Rob's analysis. However, I would note that increasingly in certain disciplines, the data volumes are now getting so large that unless you provide access to tools and compute to enable people to get to the data, then just providing access to the data is not really going to be a lot of use. No one wants to download a 1 terabyte data set. So you need, as Amy points out in chat, compute that sit next to the data, or you need to co-locate the data next to the compute so that you can actually do something with it. So I think increasingly the data delivery portals are going to require quite a lot of underpinning compute in order to let people do something sensible with the data. And that's before we even move into the realm of data visualization, which has got a whole set of challenges all on its own.
Sure.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, thanks, everyone. I hope everyone did add their name and email address in the notes. So we will send out emails I think, yeah, so as last comments, we hope to do these working groups between the interest groups at the plenaries. I think the discussion has shown that there's a lot of interest in virtual research environment and science gateways. I think, especially with data, to have an open share and open science, it's important to have environments like that and behind communities that they can work effectively and efficiently together. So Andreas, Andrew, Kieran, some last comments before we close up the session?
Not from me.
Well, hope there's a wine reception now in the evening of the RDA. Given all the comments that came in.
It's 2:30 in the morning. I'm not going to open a wine now.
For me, it's 11:30 in the morning, but since I'm German, 11 is already beer hour. Huh?
Sure.
And 2:30 is still allowed.
Maybe. We'll see.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the very interactive session. I really liked it, and I hope you all enjoyed it also.
Yeah.
And we will have a repeat session if somebody is up for it. The breakout session 10. It's for me at 1 a.m. in the morning. So I will be there. So if someone wants to join again, I know Kieran will join. Andrew, I know you have a different session to chair. Andreas, will you join?
I won't be able to join.
So yeah, so it's 5 a.m. UTC on Friday. Thank you, Andrew. So if you want to continue the discussions, we will be there, and hope to stay in touch and see you latest one day in person at an RDA plenary.
With wine in hand.
Yeah.
With wine in hand. We can but hope.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra, for pulling this together.
Yes. Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Okay.
And, have a good afternoon.
Bye all.
Andrew, I'm sure you will sleep well now.
I'm hoping, yeah.
Yeah.
See you.
All right.
See you. Bye.